afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming today. I just have a few notes I have to read because if I don't read them, I'll forget. First of all, thank you to the Franklin Historical Museum for inviting me to speak with you all today. A few housekeeping notes. Some of the photos I'm going to show you at the beginning of the presentation are not mine. They're from the internet. But I wanted to be able to show you what I saw when I got there, so that's why I've included them. Most of the photos at the rest of the presentation are ones that I took myself. I've given this presentation to a variety of audiences over the years. Sometimes a memory will I'll just have to stop for a minute, gather my thoughts, and then start again. Even after 20 years, sometimes it's difficult to talk about things. I'm going to read a short introduction and then we'll get going with the presentation. So it's so important to me that we never forget the events of September 11th, 2001, and those we lost not only in New York City, but Shanksville, Pennsylvania, and at Washington, D.C. Over the past several years, I've presented programs to students, first responders, and community groups to ensure that we never forget the sacrifice of those who died on that day and those that continue to lose their lives from a 9/11 related illness. Now let's hope this works. Of course. There we go. Mary, are we going to shut the lights off?
Oh, Phyllis. Thank you.
Yep. So back in April, as probably like everyone else who has gone through COVID has been doing, I started cleaning out closets. And I found a box that said World Trade Center Memories. In that box was a plastic bag that had these shoes in it. And these were the shoes I wore the first week I was at 9/11. Can't tell you why I saved them and why they've been in a plastic bag for 20 years, but I thought I should pass them on. So I contacted the museum and asked if they'd be interested. My reason was that I don't want people to ever forget what happened on 9/11, and I thought it'd be a great conversation starter, especially amongst people who were never born on 9/11. So the museum agreed, and that's where we are today. So we need to start at the beginning. There we go. So I grew up in Franklin, lived on Dean Avenue. When I was 24 in 1983, I moved to New York City to join the New York City Police Department. I spent the next 20 years there. I worked in a variety of assignments. I got promoted to sergeant. I met my wife, Bridget, who was also a New York City police detective. We had 2 kids, Alice and Mary, now 22 now. I am old. And I retired in 2003. We moved to Vermont in 2004, and we've been there ever since. So let's go back a little bit. 2001. Started out in April with Bridget retiring after 20 years of service with the department. Every year, she's Irish, so every year she would march in the St. Patrick's Day Parade down 5th Avenue. Mm-hmm. And this year, being her last year, she decided to dress the kids up and march them in a uniform down the street. We didn't think really anything of it, it was a nice gesture. Till the next morning when my parents called me up and said, "We just opened the Boston Herald and your kids' pictures are in the paper." So, anyways, for me, I was working for the Organized Crime Control Bureau. We did narcotics investigations, and I had just started a major case into the sale of ecstasy in nightclubs. Now, my job involved working nights, basically Thursday through Saturday, and I was off Sundays and Mondays, and Tuesdays and Wednesdays were always our early days. We went in for like 7 o'clock in the morning. We had to go to court, get wiretaps, all that stuff. So usually Tuesdays was a day tour, but on Tuesday, September 11th, I had just joined the gym. And I had an appointment that morning. So I asked my team if they'd mind if we came in for a later tour that day. And they were like, yeah, that's great. So on September 11th, we ended up going in for a later tour, which I think helped us all. We didn't respond down there until afterwards, and I'm sort of happy about that. Can I ask a show of hands? Has anyone ever been to the Trade Center before 9/11? Oh, a few years. Have you been to the observation deck? Oh, okay, good. So you're familiar with it. So for those that aren't familiar with it, the World Trade Center, well, for me, just occupied some real estate at the end of Manhattan. Whenever we had to do anything lower Manhattan, it was going down West Street to the West Side Highway, looping around to Court on the other side. I actually never went inside the World Trade Center the whole time I was there, which is kind of interesting. But that's what they say about people that live in New York. They never go to any of the museums or anything else. It opened in 1971, 110 stories, 16 acres, 7 buildings, which will come into play later when I'm discussing the area. Each floor was an acre. Just think 43,000 windows. That's a lot of windows. It had its own zip code, which is really interesting. The picture to the right here, this is the Marriott Hotel, which stood in the tower. It was quite large buildings. Like I said, unless you stood there and looked up at them, you just drove by them, and it was just something else in town. Just another picture of it, just showing this close to the Hudson River. It had the restaurant at the top, Windows of the World. The Sphere that's in the plaza, that was just a big water out there, fountains and stuff. This picture here is actually looking down. I like this picture because I was trying to explain. Well, this is West Street. That's the hotel. That's the North Tower and the South Tower. This is one of the buildings, Building 5. This is the World Financial Center. It's across the street. And there were 2 pedestrian crossways, one that went here. The next street up is Vesey Street, and that will come into play later when I'm talking. I just wanted you to have a better idea of where I was on the site. Okay, so this is a good just a description, just to sort of set the stage. So this is the World Financial Center here, American Express, all the big banks are in here. These were the pedestrian bridges, the North Bridge and the South Bridge. This was the Greek Orthodox Church here. There was a firehouse right here. Then you had World Trade Center 1, the North Tower, the South Tower. This is the hotel. This is Building 7. And then there were other buildings that were in the area of it. This is Liberty Plaza. Just remember that's the NASDAQ building when I talk about it later. And what else? I think I've covered all. Oh, this is the Bankers Trust building, which will also come into play later on. Okay, so I've mentioned how I went to the gym that day. So I came home from the gym probably about 8:30, and Bear in the Big Blue House was on. That was my kid's favorite show, and Bridget was up, and the kids were watching TV, and the phone rang about 5 minutes to 9, and it was my sister-in-law. Her husband was a fire lieutenant in the FDNY, and he had just called and said he was on his way to the World Trade Center, that a plane had hit the building. Well, planes have hit buildings before in New York, and she was like, no, you got to turn on the TV. It's all over the news. So we turned it on and watched, and we were like, wow, that doesn't look like a small plane. And then, of course, we watched the second plane hit the other tower, and we looked at each other and said, this is no accident. I mean, it was a beautiful day, almost like yesterday. It was just gorgeous, not a cloud in the sky. So I knew I was going into work. I packed the bag. I knew I probably was going to stay at work for a couple of days, and I headed down into the city. We lived about 70 miles north of the city. And someone asked me before, did you do that every day? Well, I did it most days. A couple of days I'd stay over, but I headed down. It took me about an hour to get down into Manhattan. The ride down, I don't really remember too much about it, other than that there were hardly any cars going south, but there were a lot of cars coming north. When I got to the Henry Hudson tolls, the city was closed, so I had to ID myself to get through into Manhattan. I remember driving down the West Side Highway. I could see the smoke. I ended up telling somebody later on that I could see something, a lot of smoke, but I really don't remember too much about it. My office was on 42nd Street and 10th Avenue. We got into the office, and just as I got upstairs, they had the TV on. The second building, the North Tower, had collapsed. We didn't know what we'd be doing. They just said, get into uniform. We had all this entry equipment we used to use for search warrants. We've got everything we had, sledgehammers, all sorts of stuff, threw it in the trunk of our car, gloves, and we reported to the temporary headquarters, which was on West Houston and 34th Street. Let me just move up here. When I got down there, I saw police officers like that on the left. And actually, there were a lot of police officers there that I knew. They were all from my unit, and they had worked the day tour, and they had responded. And fortunately, out of my whole command, we lost no one, which was good. I got to the temporary headquarters, went and spoke to my inspector, and he said, listen, we're missing 500 police officers and firefighters. 500. And I was like, that's impossible. You know, we can't be missing that many guys. They had gone to I don't think we had Home Depot then. It was probably some hardware store. They had boxes of paper, painter's masks. They said, grab a handful for your guys and head down as far as you can go. And then we were a mobile response unit. So we just went down and we drove as far as we could. We were about 2 blocks north of Vesey Street. We parked the car, got out. The dust and the debris on the streets was almost as high as my knee. It was like driving through snow. It was just unbelievable. The scene on the right is basically what it looked like. That's how all the streets were. There was just debris everywhere. The other thing was the fires. All the buildings that surrounded the World Trade Center were on fire. This building here, this is building 7 right here. Our post was 1 block north of that. That's where we ended up staying. The other building, you can see one of the other buildings in the back. This is the post office here. But all the buildings were on fire, and as I mentioned in the broadcast I did with Boston 25, I hated to say it, but it looked like a fire in a junkyard. I mean, that's really what it looked like. It was just all the metal was crushed, and there were these huge fires. So we secured our area where we were supposed to be, and then we waited, and we were a block from building 7 when about 5:15 a fire officer came over to us and said, you know, you really shouldn't be standing here. We're afraid about building 7 collapse. So we moved back about 2 blocks, stood in a vestibule, and 15 minutes later the building came down. And a 47-story building. I can only imagine what it was like to watch the towers fall and then to see this come down. Now you remember that when this building fell, it fell right into all the debris that all the searchers were already searching. So they had a system where they'd blow a siren, everyone would have to clear out, and then this building fell on top of everything else. So it just made matters worse trying to find people that might still be alive. We stayed on that post just about all night. Probably around 11 o'clock, someone came by with a cell phone. Of course, we didn't have iPhones then, but the cell phone tower was on the North Tower, and when that went down, we lost most of our communication. So someone finally came by with a cell phone. I was able to call home, just let them know I was okay. We stayed on post till about 12:30. When we left at 12:30 to go up the West Side Highway back to our office, we were met by hundreds of people who lined the streets with flags, posters, support. Oh, it was great to see. It was really something good to see. We got back to our office. Unfortunately, they weren't allowed to go home. We had to stay there because they didn't know what we were exposed to. So we ended up actually sleeping on cardboard boxes on the floor in uniform. By the time we fell asleep, it was probably around 1:30. We had to be back on post at 4:15 that morning. So we didn't sleep long. Got up, still in our clothes, shot back down to the site. Now our unit we were mobile response for the whole 2 weeks we were there. So they assigned us to various spots depending on where they needed us. The second day, we were over by City Hall Park. Now, you've all seen the videos of that dust cloud when the buildings fell. That dust cloud moved through every street as it passed, and it had so much debris in it and paper. Every fence, every tree was covered with paper. It was incredible. I referred to it as a ticker tape parade in a blizzard. That's how City Hall Park looked. Every tree was covered with white, and it was just papers and all sorts of things hanging on from everything. Where we were, anything south of Houston Street, if you know Manhattan, was closed. So there were no businesses open. If there were any stores there, if they had left, like their doors open, the insides of their restaurants were filled with dust. Everything was covered. It was unreal. I mean, just to be down in Lower Manhattan during the day and there's no people and every store is closed and everything's covered in dust, it was crazy. The National Guard arrived that day. That was a welcome. They were there to provide security, help with the search. They had this siren, I told you about it earlier, that they'd blow in case you had to evacuate where you were. That building, the NASDAQ building, I have it indicated up there, they thought that when the South Tower fell, that it had moved the NASDAQ building a little bit. So they brought in these lasers that they put on the building, and if they told us, if the thing starts to move, we're gonna hit the siren. Well, first of all, we had some media people, sorry, Bob, in a little private airplane flying around Ground Zero. They didn't even know how they got up there. They apparently came out of a private airport that didn't need, the air was supposed to be empty. So that was the first scare. Then like an hour later, the siren goes off. I never saw so many people running almost for their lives thinking, here's another big building now that's gonna come down on us. Fortunately for us, it didn't. It was just, something else. So we were there all day again, probably until 12:30. Finally got to go back to our command again, and was able to take a shower, and they actually had beds for us by then. It was interesting. So the paper on my left was actually something we got from command while we were there. They still didn't really know what was going on. I mean, they knew the planes had hit, but apparently they had other threats. So we were supposed to be looking for all these cars that they thought had, I guess, bombs in them. I don't know. But there was one more stressor that we needed out there, now looking for all these cars. The other thing on the right was just the notification about the evacuations, about the blasts, and then dealing with all the site hazards and everything else that was around there. So that's Wednesday. Thursday morning now, same back at shift. We're on the opposite side of the Ground Zero. Now we're with Emergency Service Temporary Headquarters. So they used to say, when the public needs help, they call the police, but when the police need help, they call emergency service. Emergency service are like the SWAT. They have all the fancy tools. You need help, they come, they help you. Well, on September 11th, they took all those tools and they went in and they tried to rescue people. Most of them went into the Marriott Hotel. It collapsed. 14 of them died out of the 23 that we lost. So we were at their temporary headquarters, and they were basically going in and out of the site, pulling out a lot of their equipment, doing searches. They had all that equipment that they could search underneath rubble. So it was good to be there because we knew a lot of the guys in emergency service. We lost a lot of the guys in emergency service, and it was a good place to be. The other thing about being there is that we were close to these parking areas. Now, as you can see from these cars, they're burnt. And you can see where they're located with that arrow. When the plane hit the building, it shot off fireballs. And they landed as far away as this parking area and burned the cars that were there. You think about it when you see that picture and you see that video of what happens, but you didn't realize how far that went. I'll show later on, we'll get into another picture of the World Financial Center, and you'll see how the fireballs actually came right into that building as well. Also, when the buildings fell with all that debris, there was fire in that. So it was just an unbelievable sight. I don't know what else to say about it. But these are the parking areas. That's one of the buildings here that surrounded the North Tower. This is the Verizon building, which is right across the street. So day 4, it's raining. Now all that white dust is turned to white mud, and it's a mess. And that's where the shoes come into play. I was wearing my shoes, and because I didn't have any boots, and they were filthy and covered in mud now, and wet. And you know, when you're standing on a foot post for 12, 14, 16 hours, you don't want wet shoes. It's the worst. So I heard that Stanley Shoe apparently had donated like hundreds of pairs of boots, and they were actually inside the World Financial Center. So they said you could go in and find some boots. So I did, and I found myself a nice pair of rubber boots, and put my shoes in my patrol car, and wore them the rest of the day. Just by coincidence, when I was in there looking for the boots, I ran into my brother-in-law. It was the first time I'd seen him. He had been in the North Tower when the South Tower collapsed and managed to get out. So it was great. We hugged each other like we hadn't seen each other in like 10 years. It was great. Also that day, President Bush showed up. So I don't remember when he got there. It was in the morning and the afternoon, but we were there. And we listened to his speech, and then after his speech, of course, you got to remember that September 11th was Election Day in New York, and every politician was there. So all those politicians, of course, descended on Ground Zero with the president. And, you know, hey, there's a whole bunch of NYPD guys. Let's line them all up, and, you know, nice photo opportunity. And who did they send? I wanted to shake President Bush's hand, but no, I had to shake Senator Clinton's hand. And she was not a favorite with the NYPD at the moment, but it was all for the better good, I guess. So we did it, and she never sent me a picture, which I was totally upset about. Anyways, so day 5, Saturday, they were assigned to this one post that we will now have for the rest of our time at Ground Zero, and that was West Street and Vesey Street. It was the place where they had the temporary morgue, and it's from there that we were sent out to do other things. On that Saturday, it was set up. The morgue is not like what you'd think it was. It was 2 tents, 3 tents actually. One tent was for property. So anyone on the site that you'd be walking around, you'd look down. A lot of times you'd find like someone's photo album that blew out of an office, or anything, knickknacks or jewelry or anything like that. You'd pick it up and you'd bring it to the property clerk, and they would tag it and put it in boxes for identification later on down the road. They had a second tent where if they found body parts, which was very common, they'd bring the body parts there, and then they were tagged and put into a refrigerated truck. And then there was the morgue where they brought bodies. And you knew they were bringing a body because everything stopped. In the whole site, it became quiet. And they would load it into they had a trailer with an ATV, cover it with an American flag, and they'd bring it to the temporary morgue. And then it would be processed, and then it would go into an ambulance to the regular morgue. So we were just sort of like there. We weren't doing anything. We were just standing there for security. And we just decided that, hey, this isn't right. These guys need an honor guard. So a couple of us would stand there, and every time they would take them out of the tent and put them in the ambulance, we'd salute. It started with 3 of us. By the end of the day, it was over 65 people standing in line all the way down the street. Construction workers, firefighters, cops. I mean, it was great. It was really great to see. And it's one of the proudest moments I had there on the site doing that. So Saturday, we worked there the whole day. 9:30 at night, they say, guess what? You can go home. I was like, oh, thank God. So I got to go home. It was the first time, and I think I spent Sunday making 1 million phone calls. My wife had been taking phone calls all week from all her relatives in Ireland and England and everywhere. All my friends just calling to see how is he, what's going on. Monday, I went to an actual shoe store and bought a new pair of boots that I wore the rest of my time at Ground Zero. So then Tuesday came around and it was back to Ground Zero again. Same thing, Vest and Wesley Street. And my team we had been doing this security, you know, oh, send them here, send them there. They wanted to get on the pile, they wanted to dig. Everyone wanted to be the person that would recover something. So finally, after a week, they told us, okay, we're gonna let you dig. We're gonna give you a section you can work on here with the rest of the people that were digging. Of course, we're in uniform, you know, we're in a police uniform, and now we're digging a hole in the ground. But that's what they wanted, so that's what we did. They give you a shovel, you start digging like a 4-foot square. You'll see from when I show some of the pictures, it wasn't just dirt, you know, you weren't just digging like you dig in your garden. There was pieces of metal everywhere, all sorts of stuff interspersed. So you'd dig like a little hole, and then they'd bring over a dog, a cadaver dog, and the dog would smell, and if he didn't get a hit, you'd keep digging. And you dig some more, and this would go on all day. I mean, we were digging for like 6 or 7 hours the whole time. And eventually we got to a spot, they brought the dog got a hit. So now they got to bring over an anthropologist or a person from the morgue, and they go through it gently to see what's there. And it was part of a rib cage that was in there. And then so they have the morgue comes and they remove it and they take it to the temporary morgue. And they say, well, you can still dig. So then we keep digging until we were standing on top of a fire department ladder truck that had been completely buried. It was unbelievable. I couldn't believe it when we looked in the hole and saw the ladder on top of the truck. So that's like a good description of what all these other recovery workers went through on the pile for months and months. It was just, it was crazy. Also, by this time now, I think every business in the United States had set up a tent of some kind at the site. I mean, every restaurant, so many volunteers. You know, you go in one day and there's nothing, you go in the next day and there's like 3 tractor trailer trucks full of water and masks, good respirators now that we're wearing. And we're all wearing gloves, and you know, it was just, to see that, oh, it was just great. You know, you went down, for the first 3 or 4 days, there was nothing. We're lucky, like the Salvation Army finally showed up and gave us some coffee and water. Other than that, there was nothing. Everything around there was closed. In fact, there was a hotel there that was closed, but there were a few guys on the police department who were chefs. So they went in, opened up the refrigerators, started taking out food, and they cooked lunch for like anyone who could come in for that day. You know, but eventually that all changed. They opened up these nice centers that we could go to during the day and just sit down and have something to drink. So it was great to see all that. Another thing we had to do were building searches. So you'd start like close to Ground Zero, and like I had to search, one of my team had to search the World Financial Center, which was right across the street. And you'd start there and you'd walk up, because all the power's out, none of the elevators are working. You have to walk up to the top, check every office. You're looking for anything. You're looking for people that might be injured that could still be in their offices. You're looking for any type of evidence. You're looking for any maybe parts of people that might be in there. And we would do that. And then when you finish that, you go to the next building and do it. And teams were doing this all during the second week. So this is Vesey Street. We're right on the corner now. This is the second week. Heading north from where I am, up the street there, that's heading uptown. All the federal agencies and everyone else had their temporary headquarters set up there. They had cleaned the streets fairly well by then. They had brought in a lot of the heavy equipment to start moving stuff. They would take things and put it in barges, and the barges would go to Fresh Kills. Fresh Kills is where all the debris went, and then it was searched again there, and I'll talk about that later. This is looking from Vesey Street. Our temporary headquarters is right here. That's looking at the building. This pile over here is the remnants of Building 7. That's where it stood right there. So this is standing on the West Side Highway. This is the area that we were digging in. Tons of workers there, all sorts of firefighters and rescue workers and heavy equipment operators. This building over here is the Bankers Trust building, and I'll talk about that in a few minutes. That is the Marriott Hotel, what was left of it. What's standing in front of it is either parts of the South Tower or the North Tower. I couldn't tell you which. But the destruction was massive. And like I said, when sometimes some of these pictures I look at and you see like a little yellow and black blip on it, and that's like a firefighter who's doing a search. They did bucket brigades at first. They'd scoop a bucket and it'd go all the way down the line, and they'd dump it into something, they'd search it, and then it would keep going. They did that all the time. This is just another, this is looking out. This is when I was doing the building search. We were looking out the World Financial Center. As you can see, they had the heavy equipment there, and the Marriott Hotel is right there, what's left of it. Just another picture from the corner of West and Vesey Street. I showed you that first pedestrian crossway. It actually connected to that building from the World Financial Center. It was completely collapsed when the North Tower fell. This picture shows that red, I'm pretty sure this thing here is part of the pedestrian crossway that was crushed, and then it was hanging there, and they cut it and put it on the side. That's the World Financial Center. As you can see, a lot of the windows are gone. Part of that building was struck by this North Tower when it collapsed. So this is inside the World Financial Center. This is looking out. So what I was telling you about the fireballs that would come through and actually melted the windows that are there, and that's looking straight out. All the sorts of paper, that paper and debris was everywhere. It was in every office. It was quite a mess. Again, the equipment operators, but you can see the magnitude of the size of look at the people there, and you know, some of the debris field was 5, 6, 7 stories high. It was just, it was something else. This is at the south end. Now that's the other pedestrian crosswalk. That one didn't collapse, but the pile of debris right there is what's left of the Greek Orthodox Church that stood there. That was crushed when the South Tower fell. This was another building. We were doing our building searches. These apartments, that's what it looked like inside. If they got hit with any debris, and if you can see where that is, that's like a good 2 to 3 blocks away from the Trade Center. The damage was so extensive, it went everywhere. This is looking at the World Financial Center again. As you can see, they've started to clean up at the bottom, but it caught, I think it was the North Tower caught the edge of that building when it came down. There was also a huge atrium in the middle of those two buildings, and it came down and crushed that as well. I was mentioning that in the second week, they had all these companies that would welcome us in for lunch. And this was looking out from one building. We went to their cafeteria. That Millennium Hotel was right next to the North Tower. and it really didn't sustain much damage other than at the bottom. And that's building 7 there to the right in the pile. So this is just another picture. I keep mentioning that Bankers Trust douche bank building. Right, that building stood right to its right was the fire department that actually got, the fire station actually got buried during 9/11. But that building got hit by the South Tower when the South Tower collapsed. And for some strange reason, they never took it down. Even after they worked on the site for months, the building, it was some type of contractual thing, they never took the building down, but they shut the water off. And then there was another fire in that building, and firefighters went in and they couldn't get a water line because it had been shut off, and they died in the building. That was months later. They finally took it down, but yeah. This is building 4 and 5 on Church Street. These would have been on the east side of the north and south towers. Just show how they were collapsed. All these buildings were the buildings I was talking about that were on fire that first night. This is St. Paul's Chapel. That was the graveyard that's on the side of the building. St. Paul's stood in the shadows of the World Trade Center. It wasn't destroyed or anything, but it got a lot of debris thrown its way. It was also the place that when people started posting pictures of the family that they lost, they covered that metal fence went around the whole chapel. It was all covered with people's pictures that were missing. I mentioned how we were doing these building searches. This was a building that was 8 blocks from the World Trade Center. Part of a landing gear of the plane went through the roof and went down through 4 stories of the building before it ended up on the first floor. We found this when we did the search with the building owner. So it was, I didn't share it, but in that second day when we were over by City Hall Park, there was actually the engine of one of the airplanes was laying right in the middle of the street. And it was something in the last few days. I don't like to try to watch some of these videos that they have on, but it was a good show, and I couldn't believe how many people were actually injured by airplane debris as it came out of the building. That's just a picture of the bottom floor with all the damage. At the end of 2 weeks, we went back to our commands and they sent us elsewhere. And in the weeks that followed, we started getting hundreds of cards like this one from school groups. All our walls were covered. We worked on the 3rd floor of this building. They started at the bottom, they went all the way up. I think they covered everything. It was great. It was really, it was nice. So that was my time at Ground Zero. You know, the first night we got back, we had this teletype, if anyone remembers what a teletype was, and it would spit out this, you know, what happened each day. And that first night we went in and they had the list of the 23 members that we lost. I lost 2 friends. One was John Delera. He was in the ESU. He was Mr. Robot. He was the guy that they needed the robot to go into a building to do a search because they had somebody in there who had a gun or someone who said they had a bomb. He was the guy. He loved his robot. He would go all over the city. We worked together. We were partners in the Bronx, and really good guy. He was last seen going into the Marriott Hotel. It took 6 months to find his body, but they did find him. The other one was Sergio Villanueva. He was an outstanding soccer player. He worked for the NYPD. He was undercover in my building. And it's strange that the week before this, he had come back to our office. We were having a party or something, and he said, you know, he says, I really like being a cop. He said, I should come back. His body was never recovered. And, you know, that's... Anyways. This is Maura Smith. She was a friend of my wife's. She worked in the 13th precinct. This picture was in the Daily News of her saving this gentleman, bringing him out of the tower. Both her and her partner responded from the 13th precinct, and they both perished when the buildings collapsed. That shield on the right is in the 9/11 Memorial Museum. So, talk about a grand total. 23 NYPD, 37 Port Authority, 343 New York City firefighters died that day. Most of them when the buildings collapsed. Has anyone been to the 9/11 Memorial Museum? Okay. So this is on the wall there when you first walk in. No day shall erase you from the memory of time. And those blue tiles represent what people thought of the blue color of the sky that day. So 2,753 people were killed. Someone asked me the other day, does 9/11, do you think about it? Do you think about it every year? Or, do you think about it all the time? And I think about it all the time. It doesn't bother me. I don't think about it that much until 9/11 comes around. But it's never out of my mind, because we are constantly losing people to 9/11 related illness. So since 2001, we're looking at over 500 firefighters and police officers have died of a 9/11 related illness. That statement I have there, in the last 2 weeks we lost 5, we actually lost 6 because we lost another firefighter yesterday. And the Victim Compensation Fund has reported that more people have now believed to have died from a 9/11 related illness than we lost on 9/11. It's scary. I have some breathing issues, nothing major, thank God. Back about 10 years ago, I had an earache, and I went to the doctor, and they checked, went to specialists. Oh, there's nothing wrong with your ear, you're imagining it, blah, blah, blah. So finally I went to one doctor, and he says, you know what, let's do a CAT scan just for the heck of it. And so they do it. The next day he calls me up, he says, report to the hospital in the morning, you're having surgery. And they found a growth in my sinuses that he attributed to 9/11, to the dust I had inhaled at the time. It was benign, so we're happy. I haven't had any issues since, so I'm glad. These are the friends and colleagues of my wife and I that we've lost since 9/11. I am going to tell you their names because it's important that you know people's names. So the guy on the left here, Charlie Gittins, he worked with me when we first started. We were rookies together. He was in the ceremonial unit, so he went to every funeral for anyone who died in the police department. He was in charge. This is Pat Boyle. He worked with me in the Bronx. This is Joe Roman. He worked with my wife in the detective squad. This is Paul Murphy. He worked with my wife and with me in narcotics. This is Jerry Bayrod. He was a lieutenant in the Midtown North squad. We worked with him a lot. This is Chris Tully. He just died last month. 47 years old. I worked with him in the Bronx. This is Joe Roman. We just buried him last week. He worked with my wife. This is Chief William L. Lee. He was in charge of narcotics. George Marino, he was with me in the Bronx. And Mike Galvin, he was with me in the Bronx. So, like I said, those are the people I know. There's so many more people that have gone. It's scary. The 9/11 Memorial Museum. I finally got there several years back. The interesting thing about it, for those that have gone, for those that haven't gone, you have to go. If you're ever in New York, you have to go to this. There had to have been over 1,000 people in this museum, and I didn't hear anything. It was just like it is now. Not one person talking. The good thing is when you get into the lower part of the museum, they don't allow phones. You can't take pictures, you can't do videos, so you don't have to worry about that distraction. But it is really an amazing museum. Upstairs is the reflecting pools. I always go when I go to New York. I always want to go visit my friends. It's really some site now. One World Trade Center, if you haven't been in, it's a hell of a ride up, I'll tell you that. It's very interesting. And once you get to the top, the views of Manhattan and of everywhere is just incredible. This is just looking at the site again. They're always building there, constantly building. They knock down a building and they build a new building. St. Paul's Chapel, I showed you the picture earlier. That's what it looks like today, all nice and clean. That tall building that's in the foreground there is the One World Trade. 2019, they decided to build a memorial glade. It was for all the people that are ill, that have died and are sick. It's all these granite slabs. They were actually put together in Vermont, which I was happy about. My wife and I went down. They had a 5K walk run. We went down in memory of our friends and participated. We were able to see the Memorial Glade, which is right there. It's just a little park. It's nice. This is the base of One World Trade. That is Vesey and West Street. It's changed a lot since I was there in 2001. As you can see in the back there, that other tall building that's way in the back, that's where the Bankers Trust building was. Thank God it's gone. This is looking down West Street now. The World Financial Center is on your right. You can see the pedestrian crosswalk. It's still there. They've rebuilt it, the one all the way down, the south one. And here's my wife and I at the end of our race. We walked, we didn't run. Yeah. So that's it. I hope you enjoyed it. If you're looking for any more information, you can go to the 9/11 Memorial Museum. They have tons of information online, especially for kids. They have a lot of educational materials for teachers. It's really important that we just continue this. Do you have any questions?
All right, thank you, Paul.
You're welcome.
This program was made possible by your Franklin friends and neighbors. Good folks just like you. Thanks for supporting Franklin TV. And thanks for watching.